Imagine a king so twisted, so perverted, that even his own royal advisors begged him to stop. Ferdinand VII of Spain ruled with an iron fist, but it was his personal life that left the nation disturbed. While the world remembers tyrants for wars and executions, Ferdinand made history for what he did in the dark, hidden dungeons, locked chambers, secret child brides, and an obsession with purity that turned into something monstrous. Whispers flooded the royal court, whispers of forced marriages, fetishized rituals, and deals made with priests to keep sins buried. But history has a way of crawling back to the surface. Because now, centuries later, newly uncovered letters, church records, and palace diary entries are finally exposing what really went on behind those velvet curtains. And once you learn the full truth, you'll never look at European royalty the same way again. Ferdinand VII wasn't born a monster. He was raised to become one. Born in 1784 to King Charles IV and Queen Maria Luisa of Parma, Ferdinand grew up in the lavish halls of the royal palace of Madrid. But even in his childhood, there were signs that something wasn't right. Servants whispered about his cruel streak, tutors feared him, and his younger siblings, they avoided him altogether. Why? Because Ferdinand had an obsession, one that grew darker with age. He was addicted to control. Not political control, not military control, but control over women, especially young women. By the time he was 14, Ferdinand was already pestering the court priest for guidance on chastity. But according to hidden letters from that era, his questions weren't innocent. He demanded that girls in the palace be monitored, and that any impure behavior be reported directly to him. Yup, as a teenager, he tried to police the virginity of his royal circle. The church thought he was just overzealous, but palace staff, they knew better. One maid, whose records were later uncovered in a 19th century family archive, wrote, "He stares at the maids like he's choosing meat for dinner. His eyes are sharp, full of calculation. We fear being assigned to his chambers, not for our safety, but for our souls." Let that sink in. By 17, Ferdinand began requesting secret audiences with confessors, private priests who weren't attached to the palace, not for his sins, but to inquire about lawful pleasure within royal marriage. According to church logs from Toledo, Ferdinand had dozens of these sessions over the course of 2 years, and nearly every priest was disturbed. One reportedly told the queen, "Your son asks questions that no priest should hear. He is not seeking absolution, he is seeking permission." So, where did this lead? Straight into arranged marriage held. At 19, Ferdinand was married off to Princess Maria Antonia of Naples, a kind, intelligent young woman who many believed could soften his edge. But behind closed doors, Ferdinand began turning their bedroom into a site of emotional torment. Court documents reveal chilling patterns. He ordered her maids to inspect her sheets every morning for signs of proper conduct. He frequently interrogated her about her thoughts, demanding to know if she fantasized about anyone else. And worse, he threatened to report her to the Inquisition if she disobeyed his desires. Yes, the literal Spanish Inquisition. But it gets darker. Maria Antonia fell ill within 2 years, allegedly from tuberculosis. But to this day, there are whispers that she may have been slowly poisoned, either by servants acting on Ferdinand's orders or from psychological distress. That made her body shut down. She died at just 21 years old. And Ferdinand, he didn't mourn. He simply asked for another bride. But this time, he had a new demand. She had to be younger. Enter Isabella of Portugal, Ferdinand's niece. Yes, you read that right. In a bizarre and twisted turn, Ferdinand pushed for a family union that would keep his bloodline pure, a word he used often in public and private. Luckily, that match never happened. The court intervened. Public backlash was too strong, but it didn't stop him from continuing down that dark path. After Napoleon invaded Spain and exiled Ferdinand, you'd think his trauma and captivity would humble him. Instead, it intensified his sickness. While in France, he begged his captors for access to women, but not just any women. He demanded that his companions be under the age of 17 and certified as untouched. French officials refused, but not all of them. A few turned a blind eye. And Ferdinand, he kept a diary. This very diary, recovered and authenticated in 1999, contains over 40 pages of sexual fantasies, violence-laced prayers, and notes about disciplining the disobedient. He wrote obsessively about control, innocence, and punishment. One entry reads, "Only in purity can a woman reflect the glory of a king. The less she knows, the more she will obey. I must have one untouched by sin and thought." This wasn't a man in love. This was a man crafting a philosophy of abuse. When Ferdinand returned to the throne in 1813, Spain celebrated. but they had no idea what kind of king he had become. His new royal mandate included laws restricting the rights of women, including limits on female education, and increased church oversight on marriage. Coincidence? Not at all. Ferdinand was building a system to control women from birth, so that by the time they reached royal age, they were already docile. And who was the first to suffer? His third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony. She was just 15 when they married Ferdinand. He was for one. Let that sink in. And this is where things turned truly disturbing. Spain had seen tyrants before, but what Ferdinand VII introduced after his return to the throne in 1813 wasn't just monarchy, it was misogynistic monarchy weaponized. And his obsession with purity and virginity wasn't limited to whispers anymore. It was law, ritual, and terror. Let's start with his third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony. She was 15. He was 41. She had just finished her religious education in Dresden. He had just come out of years of psychological rot and paranoia from captivity in France. It was not a love story. It was a calculated act by Ferdinand, a man who demanded that his next wife be as innocent as Eve before the apple. And so began the Virgin Contract. Yes, that's what historians later called the official document drawn up by palace scribes, signed by bishops and Ferdinand himself, declaring that Maria Josepha must remain untouched before the wedding night and undergo an intimate inspection by royal doctors to confirm her virginity. Let that sink in. It wasn't just cruel, it was institutionalized sexual power play. And it got worse. The inspection would be overseen by a court-appointed bishop. The results were to be sealed and locked in the royal archive. And Ferdinand insisted on being informed before the ceremony even took place. This wasn't marriage. It was psychological warfare disguised as tradition. And once the marriage began, it turned into a prison of rituals. Servants would later describe how Maria Josepha had to bow before entering the king's chamber every night. She had to recite full prayers aloud before laying down. Her hands were not allowed to touch Ferdinand without invitation. And most chilling of all, the king kept a written list of permitted positions, only 3, and any deviation was considered impure. He reportedly kept a sin chart where he would mark infractions with red ink. If she resisted, he would call the bishop, yes, to report her, like a child being sent to the principal. This royal paranoia spread like wildfire through the palace. Young women in court were told to dress modestly, cover their ankles, and avoid fragrant perfumes lest they be seen as tempting the king. One duchess reportedly fled court entirely, saying, "His eyes do not see women. They see objects to correct." It didn't stop at his wife. The royal bedroom rules leak in 1822. A scandal exploded, one that nearly shattered the monarchy's illusion of holiness. A disgruntled royal page fled the palace and secretly handed over a collection of internal royal memoranda to a local radical newspaper in Cadiz. Inside, detailed instructions issued by Ferdinand himself regarding how the royal staff should prepare his wife for him nightly. Here's what the leaked document allegedly contained. Maria must be bathed by her maid every evening before the king enters. Her hair must be brushed exactly 60 strokes. No mirrors were allowed in the room, for vanity is the devil's lens. She must not speak unless spoken to. A candle must remain lit at all times to watch her conscience. And most disturbingly, a maid must wait outside the door during the encounter, in case her spirit should resist. That line sent shockwaves through Spain. Pamphlets were distributed. Priests were outraged. Women in Madrid held secret meetings, demanding that the queen be removed from her husband's chamber. But Ferdinand crushed the backlash with brutal precision, arresting over 70 protesters, exiling liberal bishops, and declaring that the wife of a king belongs only to God and the crown. The queen, she didn't speak publicly again for 2 years, and when she finally did, it was a chilling note sent to her family in Saxony. "Pray for me. My duties are not of the flesh, but of obedience." That letter was later used by historians to show how deep Ferdinand's psychological hold had become. The Virgin's bed, a royal myth that might be real around this time. Whispers began of a second bedroom in the palace, one only a few servants had ever seen. It was dubbed La Comédie La Virgin, the Virgin's bed, according to legend. It was a room Ferdinand had specially constructed, with white marble walls, a crucifix above the bed, and one small window that allowed only moonlight to filter through. It was said he would bring Maria Josepha there only when she had been especially obedient, and leave her there, alone, for hours afterward, locked inside. No food, no light, no company. One former maid claimed she was assigned to clean the room. Just once. In her diary, she described, "There was a long silver rod on the wall. Its purpose I did not ask. but I was told to leave all the sheets precisely folded. The air in the room was colder than death. The room was eventually sealed after Ferdinand's death. But to this day, no official record confirms or denies its existence. And that's exactly what makes it so haunting. The fertility panic despite all his control. Ferdinand had one growing fear: he couldn't produce an heir. Maria Josepha struggled to conceive, not surprisingly given the emotional and physical trauma she endured. So what did Ferdinand do? He turned to the church again. This time, he issued a royal decree to permit chastity-focused interventions by court priests, which, according to modern historians, were creepy spiritual examinations of the queen's body and soul. He blamed her inner sin for the infertility. He blamed her lack of spiritual surrender. He even blamed the moon's alignment. Meanwhile, Maria Josepha wrote to her confessor, "I am blamed for what I cannot give. I have no more tears, only prayers." By 1829, she died childless, heartbroken, and likely from prolonged illness brought on by stress and neglect. Ferdinand. He remarried again, this time to Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, a woman 22 years his junior. The cycle restarted. But what happened next? It would cause a national civil war, change the rules of Spanish succession forever, and expose the true legacy of the most perverted king in history. By the time Maria Josepha Amalia died in 1829, Ferdinand VII had already carved out his legacy, not as a just ruler or brave leader, but as a man whose reign was defined by obsession, repression, and disturbing control. But the story doesn't end with her, because at age 45, just months after his third wife's death, Ferdinand remarried. His fourth wife, Maria Cristina of the Two Sicilies, was only 23 years old. By now, everyone in Europe had heard whispers about Ferdinand's twisted past, but no one dared challenge the Spanish crown directly, especially not Maria Cristina, because she knew from day one that she was marrying a broken man who ruled through fear, the desperation for an heir with time running out and his health deteriorating. Ferdinand's desperation reached a fever pitch. He needed a male heir. Spain's royal lineage was on the verge of collapse, and Ferdinand was paranoid that he would die without passing on the throne. He ramped up spiritual interventions. He doubled down on palace surveillance. And worst of all, he resumed his fertility rituals. These rituals, reportedly suggested by an ultra-conservative priest, involved Maria Cristina fasting, taking spiritual oaths, and even sleeping alone for 40 nights before she was allowed to lie with the king. During these periods, Ferdinand would write unsettling letters, some of which were later recovered from royal archives, where he refers to himself as the chosen seed and to Maria Cristina as his vessel of virtue. One letter ends with, "God has given me power over bodies and spirits. She must obey, for the kingdom requires it." Historians still debate whether Maria Cristina consented to these acts, or merely survived them, but something unexpected happened. She got pregnant twice. The first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. The second, a daughter was born, Isabella II. And this is where the chaos truly began. The Carlist War and the legacy of Control. Ferdinand had long insisted that only a male could inherit the throne, but faced with no sons and dying breath by breath, he issued a last-minute decree before his death, abolishing Salic law and naming Isabella as his heir. His brother, Carlos, was furious. Carlos believed the throne belonged to him. After all, he was next in line, and he had been quietly preparing for the crown for years. When Ferdinand changed the law, it didn't just shift inheritance, it ignited a war. The First Carlist War tore Spain apart from 1833 to 1839. Why? Because one man, whose rule had been driven by control, virginity, and legacy, couldn't accept that his body had failed him. So he tried to manipulate fate with laws, rituals, and holy decrees. And in doing so, he left behind a bloody power vacuum. The death of Ferdinand VII died on September 29, 1833. But his death wasn't peaceful. Not by any means. According to palace records, in the final month of his life, the king was delirious, plagued by hallucinations, night sweats, and bouts of violent shouting. One night, his chief physician documented the king screamed at the children. He asked us to remove the girl from under his bed. There was no girl. Another servant reported that Ferdinand was obsessed with keeping his daughter Isabella away from mirrors. He claimed they held spirits that would spoil her purity. This man, once a child-obsessed king, died afraid of the very image of innocence he built his life around. In his will, he left strict instructions that no women except clergy were to touch his body after death, that his royal diary be burned, it wasn't fragments survived, and that his wives be remembered as servants of God's divine plan. Spain mourned publicly, but behind palace walls, there was relief. Even his own ministers, according to their memoirs, considered his death a cleansing moment. The erased files, and what survived after Ferdinand's death. The court moved fast to erase his personal records, letters, orders, and private accounts were either destroyed or locked inside royal archives. But not everything vanished. In 1912, a Spanish historian discovered a leather-bound book in a forgotten monastery in Lean. Inside, 30 pages of disturbing notes, allegedly written by Ferdinand's third wife, Maria Josepha. During her final months, some quotes, "I count my days not by sunlight, but by the number of times I cry without sound. My husband believes. Obedience is love. It is not. I dream of a world where women do not serve fear." The book is now preserved at the Biblioteca Nacional de Espapa, though its full contents are restricted. Why? Because it's still considered too controversial. The final reflection: Ferdinand VII is remembered in textbooks as a reactionary king who reversed liberal reforms and restored absolute monarchy. But the truth? He was a man driven by a sick need to dominate the female body and soul. He married girls, shamed women, manipulated priests, and turned royal marriage into ritualized abuse. And yet, he's rarely discussed. His horrors are often skipped, softened, or buried under the politics of the time. But those who look closer see a legacy of control, paranoia, and perversion so deep, it helps spark wars, shatter families, and traumatize generations. He was a king who feared women. So he tried to own them. Now that you know the full story of Ferdinand VII, ask yourself this: why don't history books talk about this? Why do we know every move of war generals and conquerors, but not the kings who ruled their own homes like prisons? What happened behind those palace walls wasn't just scandal. It was systematic abuse, disguised as royalty, hidden beneath silk sheets and church blessings. So, do you think Maria Josepha's lost diary should be published in full? Should Spain finally acknowledge Ferdinand's twisted legacy? Or is the world still too afraid to confront the truth about its most sacred leaders?